Welcome to my home office here in Basingstoke in North Hampshire, where I've spent most of the last year based and trying to get the company through this pandemic. But as Sarah said at the outset, what a positivity, what a positive feeling we're getting from delivering these series of talks. It's great to be with you all again this evening. I'm going to be taking you to Puerto Rico tonight. It's an island that I know particularly well for reasons that will become evident shortly. We ran our first ever tour to Puerto Rico just before the pandemic struck early on in 2020, and it was a great success. It's a 10-day tour, lovely winter sunshine, and a good attempt at seeing the 17 endemic birds that are present on the island. So as usual, let's quickly get our bearings. We've already seen St. Lucia and Trinidad and Cuba. I loved Ed's and Byron's two talks, and we should see mine and Tom's talks this evening. You will see threads of commonality threading through the talks, as you would expect, I guess, in a geographical area like this. Puerto Rico is the easternmost of the Greater Antilles. So here's Cuba, where we were before the break with Byron. Next, we have Hispaniola, comprising of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And here is Puerto Rico here, just across the Mona Passage, with the US Virgin Islands, the British Virgin Islands, and all the ex-British colonies, the Les Antilles, branching out in an arc down to Venezuela. Now, Puerto Rico very rarely appears on the news here in the UK. We very rarely hear too much about it. So just to give a little bit of background, I thought I'd just talk briefly about the history and some modern-day famous Puerto Ricans. So Christopher Columbus arrived in Puerto Rico in November 1493 on his second journey to the Americas. And upon arrival, he was greeted with the Taino Indians. By all accounts from those early Spanish chronicles, a very welcoming, gentle race. But such was the happenings in the Caribbean in the 50 years after the Spanish arrived, that their numbers were greatly decimated. Just 50 years after the Spanish arrived, the numbers had decreased from about 30,000 to just a few hundred. That's partly down to the hard labor enforced by the Spanish colonists, but also the diseases, not least smallpox brought in by the Europeans. The Taino name for Puerto Rico was Borinquin, and Puerto Ricans themselves are known as Boricuas. That's where that word comes from. As I say, Puerto Rico is very rarely in the news, but some well-known faces you might have heard of. Lin-Manuel Miranda, top left, who brought Hamilton to Broadway and the West End 2 or 3 years ago. On the right here, we have Jennifer Lopez, who I thought was fantastic in the presidential inauguration last week. Jennifer Lopez is a Nuyorican, so-called. She was actually born in New York, born and raised in New York of Puerto Rican immigrant parents. Luis Fonsi, down in the bottom center there, the artist behind the mega 2017 hit Despacito. The video for that song is the most viewed YouTube video of all time, and the well-known actor turned director, bottom left here, Benicio del Toro. But casting aside all of these Puerto Ricans aside, and let me just mention there, of course, in the top, Gabriel Lugo. I've been associated with Puerto Rico for 20 years, but it took me until last year to finally get a tour off the ground. And one of the reasons was the lack of a quality birding guide, but I have got to know Gabriel over the last couple of years. A lovely guy, top quality birder and host, and he led our tour last year and will be your companion and guide should you choose to travel there with us. But the most important Puerto Rican from my point of view is my wife, who's from the island, and I've persuaded her to join me for a couple of minutes this evening, just to talk through a couple of questions. Here's my wife Maritza, who's going to join me.
Hi everybody, hi.
Now, the politics of Puerto Rico is a bit of a mystery to us Europeans. So just tell people tonight a bit about Puerto Rico, where it stands politically at the moment.
Yeah, so Puerto Rico is a Commonwealth of the United States, but possibly not in the same sense as is understood in this country. So it is specifically an Estado Libre Asociado, which is a free associate state. So what that means is that to a big extent, we're kind of like a state of the United States in terms of institutional configuration and following federal policy and legislation, but we also retain some freedoms. Puerto Rico was ceded by the Spanish to the USA in 1898 as part of the Spanish-American War. And in 1917, Puerto Ricans became American citizens. And so we are all American citizens by birth. Both English and Spanish are official languages in the island. So really Puerto Rican identity is like that blend of Latin, Spanish, and also US American kind of culture. So it's a really unique culture.
We've been through the referendum, of course, in the UK over the past few years. We seem to have come to almost the end of that process now. There's still a lot of work to do, but referendums actually come up on the Puerto Rican political landscape quite often. Yeah. How often does a referendum happen in the island, and what choices are on the table when that happens?
Yeah, so to be honest, when I think of referendums in the island, I feel as if they happen all the time, but actually they've happened 6 times since 1967. The first one that I took part in was in 1993, and there were 3 options there. So the first one was to remain the status quo, what we are, or still are, which is a associated free state, to become a state of the Union, a state of the United States, therefore the 51st state, or to become a nation, an independent nation. In 1993, remaining as we are won the referendum, really closely followed by becoming a state of the United States. And that has been the result in every referendum, except for one that took place last year in November. We had a referendum in November 2020 alongside the general elections. And as possibly as you know, we follow the same electoral timetable as the United States every November, every 4 years. So this referendum took place in November, and different from the other 5, there was only one option. So the option was, do you want to be a state or do you not? So the options were yes or no, which happens to be the question that it has been asked to other states of the United States before they've become a state. And state won, 52% to 48% no. Now what that means is yet to be seen.
Okay, great. In a nutshell, what when you see the island, what makes it so special for you? What qualities does Puerto Rico have?
Gosh, I'm a Boricua fully. I love the island. And growing up in Puerto Rico, I'm from San Juan, which is the capital city. It's a really vibrant and dynamic city, as you would expect, of every capital city, but it happens to be a coastal city, which means that we had really easy access to the sea. And so growing up, the sea was part of my life really on a daily basis. So the smell of the sea, the warmth, I guess we enjoy the fact that it's so warm, the sea, that you can go there any time of the year and just go and have a chapuzón and just enjoy the sea. And also the fact that the waters are so clear, there's a lot of color. So in my case, I love snorkeling and scuba diving. So you can enjoy amazing, beautiful marine life on the corals. And that really is very special. And also I miss the sound of the coqui. I guess you haven't talked about that yet, but the coqui is a little frog that is endemic to the island. And it makes a beautiful sound day and night. So it's always in the background. You take that for granted when you live in the island. And then when you leave, you miss it. I also miss the food. The food is exquisite. A lot of plantain-based and fish-based dishes. Particularly I miss the people and the characters of Puerto Rican. And again, with that blend of Latin and American. So extremely open, passionate, friendly. And at the same time, very driven and very wanting to innovate. And lastly, the ecosystems, the diversity of ecosystems, beautiful place. So I love the island. For me, it's the best place in the world. And I guess I'm biased, but I encourage everybody that is listening to go and visit and find that for yourselves and make that decision. Okay,
just before we get on to the birds, just a quick comment on each of these 4 typical Puerto Rican dishes then.
Okay. So we have at the top left, we've got arroz con habichuelas and tostones. Tostones is a beautiful kind of dish that is made with plantain. And then we've got mofongo on the other side with prawns. And then we've got arroz con gandules and lechon asado, which is pork. And we love stew, so that's a lamb stew that is also quite typical.
That's great. I hope that gives you a bit of a flavour of the island from someone who's lived and grown up there. So that's great, Missy. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Right, let's continue our tour. I'll just give you an outline now of the island. Here's the San Juan metropolis with Vieques and Culebra. Here are the British Virgin Islands and the US Virgin Islands. Isla de Mona and the Dominican Republic here. We fly into San Juan and then explore the karst belt here along the north of Puerto Rico's coast. And then we head right down to the southwest to Parguera and the dry forests of Huánuco before we wend our way back through the island to explore the tropical forest of El Yunque and some snorkeling off the northeast coast here before ending our tour back in San Juan. So here's an aerial view of San Juan with the Castillo de San Felipe here, protecting the harbour, the old Spanish castle, the historic centre of San Juan, and then Condado and Isla Verde and all the hotels and office buildings and tourist district up here to the west. So we will head along the north coast through, as I say, Puerto Rico's karst belt, limestone substrate here. And you can see these giant haystacks, which are only prevalent really in Puerto Rico and in China. You won't find them anywhere else. And just to give you an idea of the scale of the topography here, here's the famous satellite dish and observatory of Arecibo. You may remember the 1995 Bond film Goldfinger. Pierce Brosnan was involved in that one as Bond. And there was a long action sequence set here at Arecibo, and also the 1997 film with Jodie called Contact with Jodie Foster. So this is such difficult topography that the island's most protected forests are included in this area. It's very difficult to road build or do any other engineering projects. So we can actually sweep up a lot of Puerto Rico's birds just in the first day. Probably the most common bird in the island is the banana quit, locally called Reinita, the little queen. Ubiquitous all throughout Puerto Rico's habitats. But we quickly get into some of the wider Caribbean specialities like Red Legged Thrush and some of the Puerto Rican endemics. And this is really where you'll weave a thread between Ed's talk and Byron's talk and my talk and Tom's talk, because some of these birds are island endemics, yet superficially very similar to neighboring islands equivalent birds. So this is the Puerto Rican bullfinch, the Puerto Rican flycatcher, the Puerto Rican vireo, not dissimilar to the Cuban vireo that Byron showed you a few minutes ago, the Puerto Rican spindalis, the Puerto Rican woodpecker. This is a Puerto Rican emerald. Pretty much every bird here is prefixed with the term Puerto Rico, as you probably gathered by now. However, this is the Antillion mango or green mango. Gabrielle will take us to a friend's house, which has a lovely veranda and hummingbird feeders, and we'll pretty much see all of Puerto Rican's hummingbirds in that one lunch stop. And the green-throated carib, which I think Ed mentioned earlier on. From a birding perspective, one of the attractions, I think, of visiting one of these Caribbean islands is not just the wonderful weather and culture and food at a really dank time of year for us northerners, but it's the chance in birding parlance to sweep up or clean up. So you can visit one of the Greater Antilles and have a pretty good shot at, from a birding perspective, seeing everything that's available. And if you keep a live list, not having to go back there again to get any different species. This is a Puerto Rican endemic, the Adelaide's warbler, named after the daughter of the first bird that ever captured a live specimen, Robert Swift. This is the Puerto Rican toady, San Pedrito in Spanish, a nod to Saint Peter. Very similar to the Cuban toady. There are actually 5 endemic toadies in the Greater Antilles. I think Hispaniola has 2, Haiti has 1, and Dominican Republic has 1. Jamaica has 1, Cuba has 1, and Puerto Rico has 1. This won the bird of the tour when we did a little survey in the airport on the way back in early March last year. The starbird, but a really difficult one to see these days, is the Puerto Rican parrot, clinging on to existence, heavily impacted by the hurricanes that sweep periodically through Puerto Rico. But the US National Forest Service is working very hard to conserve this species. And there are a couple of active reintroduction sites which are heavily protected, which we can't get into as visitors. So a chance flyby is probably our best hope of a sighting. Another endemic here, this is the Elfin Woods Warbler, not discovered until 1968, would you believe, and not described until 1972. We'll see this in the mountains as we drive from north to south. And our destination, as I said, down in the far southwest of Puerto Rico, is the town of Parguera and Cabo Rojo here, with the lighthouse, lovely Caribbean beaches here, and a unique Caribbean dry forest in which and around we'll see the endemic yellow-shouldered blackbird, and we'll take time to explore the hot and dry Guanaca dry forest. Some special species here that we won't see elsewhere. The Puerto Rican lizard cuckoo, the Puerto Rican screech owl, and the Puerto Rican nightjar, although we will realistically only get views as they cook in our torch beams after dark. Parguera and one or two other sites around Puerto Rico are very well known for the bioluminescence caused by tiny sea creatures emitting light due to a chemical reaction when agitated. And this is quite a money spinner for the Puerto Rican tourism scene. And if you still have energy after our birdwatching activities, we can go out either in kayaks or on a larger boat to see this natural phenomena. Maritza mentioned the cocky, the much loved cocky, which the sound of which is synonymous with Puerto Rico. And I'll play you the sound in a minute. The first syllable is supposedly to ward off other male intruders, and the second syllable attracts attendant females. But as Maritza said, this is a beautiful sound, and it's you hear it whether you're in downtown San Juan or up in the mountains or on a palm fringed beach every single night. That just takes me right back there, and that little animal is a part of Puerto Rican folklore and features heavily in children's literature. Lovely little creature. So wending our way back to the northeast of the island, we'll go back through the mountains, which peak at about 1,400 meters, about the height of Ben Nevis in Scotland. We'll do a couple of birding stops for things like white-crowned pigeon. And then we'll drop in on El Yunque National Forest, the largest tropical, in fact, the only tropical forest in the whole of the US national park system. It's one of Puerto Rico's great treasures. And we'll spend the whole day walking the trails here, soaking up the atmosphere, doing some bird watching, although realistically by this point, we would have seen almost all birds available to us on the island, but it's just a different habitat to anything we've seen thus far. And from some of the viewpoints, we'll get lovely views out towards the Atlantic coast. Arriving in Fajardo, right up on the northeastern coast of Puerto Rico, we will see this bird that Ed mentioned earlier, the Antillion crested hummingbird, here in its westernmost extremity of its range, so just clinging on the eastern coast of Puerto Rico. But just to kind of round off the tour, Ed mentioned some of the reefs and the snorkeling. Well, here in Puerto Rico, we have some of the best reefs and snorkeling conditions and corals in the Western Hemisphere. We will take to the sea for a day, either on a diving boat or a catamaran, with an icebox full of cold drinks and tropical fruits. And we'll just spend the day doing some sea watching for brown boobies and other seabirds, and just swimming and snorkeling over these magnificent reefs. And it's a lovely way to round off the tour. You can have a green sea turtle cruise by, or a barracuda, myriad tropical fishes, and some outstanding corals, and it's a lovely way to spend the day. Magnificent, pristine condition, these Caribbean reefs. And from there, it's just an hour and a half, 2 hour drive back to San Juan, where we wind up the tour. Have a full day in the capital, both looking at the 15th century Castile, 16th to 18th century was when it was built. Building got underway in 1539. As I say, it protects the natural harbour of San Juan, and then we'll gently stroll around the capital, shady streets, colourful shady streets. It's a lovely picturesque place. Some of you may have been here before. You might have done a Caribbean cruise. San Juan is a very popular drop-off point for the big Caribbean cruises. So on some days you can find historic San Juan is quite busy. But we'll take you to the bar in historic San Juan, where the Pina Colada was first invented in 1963. I say you haven't had a Pina Colada until you've had one. in Old San Juan. Delicious cocktail. And over to the right there, the local piraguas, much loved by Puerto Rican children. The best way I can describe this is like a slush puppy. You can see a big block of ice there, and the vendor will scrape shavings of ice off with a special tool into a cup, and then pour your favorite syrup flavor on top, be it raspberry or strawberry or one of the tropical fruits. It's a lovely way to cool down in the middle of the afternoon. So that gives you a bit of a flavour for Puerto Rico, a very undervisited island from the British perspective. Norwegian flew there for about 3 years direct, but unfortunately they've, in the wake of the pandemic, said that they're going to focus on short-haul routes now, which means we're back to flying via Spain or the United States. But I think it's a great choice for a mid or late winter break, combining some bird-watching culture and some relaxation. And one question that's actually put to us the other evening, I think it's well worthwhile myself and the ops teams grappling with, and that is, what are these islands and holidays in the Caribbean and Central America can you combine? Because we get a feeling listening to you that actually after the pandemic, people are A, going to be really keen to travel, and B, to make the most of their airfares and maybe combine some of these islands into a longer holiday. So that's Puerto Rico for you, and I'm now looking forward to listening to Tom speak on Jamaica. So over to you, Tom.